Hello, everyone. My name is Robbie Bergstrom. I'm the Assistant County Clerk for Tuolumne County. Thank you for joining us tonight for Ready, Set, Run, everything you need to know about running for office. Before we get going, a couple of things. Feel free to ask questions using the Q&A. I will not be referencing the chat function as much. I see people are already using the chat function, but I prefer if you use the Q&A. The Q&A that can be found at the bottom of your screen. Just go ahead and click that, and it'll come up with a box where you can type your question and send that over. And when we have a moment during the webinar, I'll be happy to try to answer that. If you were not given a phone number to call in on the email, you are welcome to turn it on to your computer speakers for audio. Let me go ahead and go back up. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Debbie Batista, who's going to start us off. Debbie, are you there?
I am here. Hi, all. Thank you for this interesting way the world is changing and how we're doing things. So it's nice to see you guys all in person, but it's better that we at least get the information out to you. This will be at least, we're going to try and do a lot of things remotely if possible. I see one question there. They were asking about 460s. We now have purchased the ability to start filing things electronically. We're going to try and do that as much as possible. I'm glad you guys are interested in running. You know, if you've heard me speak before, you know that one of the things that I say all the time is that if you really want to get involved, local politics and local boards are the easiest way to have your voice and your opinion, if you're willing to do the work, be heard. That we have school boards if you have children, or we have school boards if you're just interested in education. There's water districts, there's fire districts, there's utility districts, and of course there's the Board of Supervisors and the 5 elected officials, but we're not up for office for 2 more years. So thank you for the interest. I hope you learn a lot, and if you have any questions, like Robbie said in one of the Q&As, feel free to call the office. We're here. We're also here physically if you want to come in and ask questions. We do prefer if you call in and try to make some appointments, just because, as you all know, in this new life that we all live, social distancing is a little difficult to achieve. And if we can set up an appointment, it's easier to easier to schedule people so that we don't have a lot of people waiting to talk to us. So congratulations for those of you who are going to run, and let's get started.
Okay, right off the bat, I see the question about the 460s and whether or not you can mail those in. David, at the moment, I believe you can mail those in, but I'm going to go ahead and research those. And what I'll do is, if there's questions that I can't answer here on the webinar, I'll go ahead and write them down, and I'll send out an email to everyone who attended with those answers. Okay. Let's go ahead and go on into it. So the topics we're going to cover tonight are, we're going to talk first about the timeline, a couple of important dates that are coming up pretty quick. We're going to talk briefly about the handbook design. On the initial email, I sent you out the link to the handbook. If you don't have that, you can go to our website while you're on this webinar and pull up our handbook from the Tuolumne County Elections website. We're going to talk about the filing process, and this is just the general logistics about submitting your application and getting the paperwork back to us, in particular in consideration to our current situation with COVID-19. We're going to talk about what are the absolute required documents to qualify as a candidate for the ballot. One of those, another document you may consider is the ballot designation. That's a title that goes underneath your name on the ballot. We'll talk about the things you should consider when choosing a ballot designation. We'll talk about the candidate statement. That paragraph or two that you are able to write and have placed in the voter information guide that's sent out to every voter. And we're also going to talk briefly about other documents for you to consider whether or not you want to file those. We're also going to talk about requesting voter information. As a candidate, or if you're part of a campaign, you are eligible to request voter information so that you can focus your campaign. We're going to talk also about financial and campaign filing. That's reporting essentially money that's coming in and money that's coming out. So, so you are fully transparent for your campaign. We're also going to give helpful information for you to consider. And we're going to talk briefly about the Voters' Choice Act. We implemented the Voters' Choice Act in March of this year, and we're going to do so again in November. But we're just going to talk, if you know, you voted by mail and didn't know that there was any difference, I'm going to talk briefly about what are the differences and how that might affect how you campaign to people. So again, looking at page 4 of the handbook, it shows the dates of the declaration of candidacy and nomination. The first date you need to know is this coming Monday, a week from today, July 13th. That's when everything gets going. That is the first day that we can issue the paperwork to you, and it ends on August 7th, 2020. That's a Friday. That's a Friday. Now, if the incumbent who's currently in office does not file, the filing period gets extended for 5 days. So it goes on until August 12th, which is a Wednesday. So again, if the incumbent that is currently in office does not file, it gets extended by 5 days. So let's go ahead and talk a moment about how the handbook is organized, so to help you find the information you're looking for. There are actually 4 sections in there. There's general information. There's the procedure and the requirements for filing. There's the additional documents that I was referring to for you to consider if that's something that you would like to file, and some helpful information like requesting voter information, or if you are one of those candidates that need to file a petition, there are some helpful information about the right way and the wrong way to file or to circulate a petition. On page 8 of the book, there is the section Offices Up for Election. And this gives a brief summary of offices that are up for election that could go on the ballot this coming November. You'll see here for Board of Education, there's 4 offices that are up for election for 4-year terms. So if you follow it all the way across, you'll see in this column it has a 4, but there's only 1 trustee area that is for a 2-year term, a 2-year term. Now you see there that it lists the incumbent at the time of the publishing of this handbook. So if that incumbent were to leave office before 5 o'clock on the last day of filing, then it would get extended. Now if you look here in this column, where it says 20 to 40, that's referring to nomination signatures. The County Board of Education is the only contest this election where you will have to receive nomination signatures, and this would require you or someone on your behalf to go around and circulate the petition and gather signatures for you, and you need at least 20 but no more than 40. So that means if you walk in here and you have 42, you have 50, we cannot accept those extra signatures. You can turn in from 20 to 40. We always recommend that you turn in more than 20 because always some signatures become disqualified for various reasons. Again, there's a section in your handbook that goes through those. There's a section also in the book on page 15 that talks about why a seat might be short-term. briefly, it means that someone was appointed to that seat midterm. So now the seat goes up for election for the final two years of that term. On page 17, and I also believe page 19, it gives a little summary for school offices and special districts. Gives the filing periods, which are the ones that I just mentioned before. And at the bottom, it talks about what documents are required. And notice here it says nomination petition for Board of Education candidates only. And in the second section, it says additional documents to consider. All 5 of these documents are optional, but you should give some consideration to if you need to file them or if you would like to file them. On the page following that, you're going to have a section that talks about the qualifications for the office. The qualifications for a school district, a community service district, a sanitary district can vary. So you want to make sure you take a look at that and you double check that you are in fact qualified to run for that office. Good, so let's go ahead and talk about the filing process. It's a little bit different this coming November, as you might imagine. So the state is allowing more options for filing for the office, for any office, in light of COVID-19. Let me point out before we go too deep into this though, regardless of which option you choose to request your papers and complete them, you must turn in the original wet signature document. That means the document that you physically signed back to us by Friday, August 7th at 5 o'clock. So how can you request the documents? Every candidate must complete a candidate application. This is also available online. We can always mail one to you if you'd like. I'll go ahead and send out the link to it as well following this webinar. It gives us basic information about you, like your residence address, the office that you want to run for, which you'd be surprised a lot of candidates walk to the counter and say, give me the paperwork. And we have to say, well, what do you want it running for? It tells us how you want your name to appear on the ballot, and it tells us what you want your ballot designation to be. And it helps us check your eligibility for it. Number one, we look at your residence address and make sure that you're in the district that you're filing for. On the application, this is where you specify if you plan on receiving your documents in person, or if you would like us to mail your documents or email them to you. This is a new part of it. Before, we would require you to walk into this office and receive it, or else give us a letter saying we could give it to someone else in person. But now the state is allowing us to mail or email your documents to you if you request that. So if you are wanting the documents to be issued to you in person, we ask that you make an appointment with our office by calling this number during business hours, and we can go ahead and make that appointment for you. This will help us know that someone's coming in, and it'll also allow us to stagger people coming in and to prevent them from all being there at the same time. So it's to your benefit to make an appointment. So I have a question from Marianne Schmidt of the candidates that were in the primary do not need to refile because they are on the ballot already, right? That's correct. So for example, the candidates that are going to a runoff in Supervisor District 1 and Supervisor District 5 do not need to refile. However, there's two things to keep in mind. One is if they want to change their ballot designation, they need to refile their ballot designation worksheet with us by the deadline. And if they want, excuse me, sorry. If they want a candidate statement to appear in the voter information guide, they will still need to file a new candidate statement and pay the fee before we will publish that. Thank you for that question. So if you are wanting to be issued the documents by mail or email, we will be sending the documents to the address that you indicate on the application. So either the mailing address or the email address that you put on your application. So keep that in mind when you enter that. We have a question from Judy Selby. Will you be able to email the application? Yes. Yes, you will be able to email the application. What we ask that you do, though, is place the application in the mail to us so that we do have your wet signature. But we do not require the application be received with a wet signature before we generate the documents. So yes, you can email those to us. So something else that has actually existed for a while with the candidate application is you can authorize another person to be issued the documents in person at our office. So for example, if you are someone who is particularly at risk when it comes to COVID-19 and you prefer not to leave your home, but you do want to receive the documents in person, you can authorize another person on your behalf to receive those documents. So there is a section in the application, actually on the back of the application, that says providing authorization. You just go ahead and complete that and make sure that is signed and send that to us, and we can go ahead and give those documents to the person you authorized. One of the #1 questions we get is, can I get the documents now? Many of the documents, particularly the Declaration of Candidacy and the nomination, is we cannot issue those before the filing period. So I apologize, but we can't go those. But we only have 1 week left, so we can get those to you shortly. So if you have received your documents by mail or email, we will provide an instruction guide to you. So what this will look like is it will say on this document, make sure that you fill out these lines. Don't forget these. If this is an optional section, you may skip it if you want to. So we'll give you a guide to follow. And of course, you are welcome to scan and email the documents for review. So you are welcome to scan and email those documents so that we can look them over and tell you if anything is missing. However, you cannot file it that way. The original signatures on the original signature copy must be received physically by us. If you've received the documents in person, we will walk you through those documents, and we'll walk you through it at the counter. We always ask people expect to spend at least 30 minutes to complete the paperwork. That's probably the most surprising things to people is we have a parking place in front of our office that's 12 minutes. They park there and they say, okay, I'm good to go. And we tell them, well, this is going to take longer than that, so you need to repark. So if you come in person, just know that it's going to take a few minutes to complete all that paperwork. Now, the one tricky thing about executing the documents is that every candidate must execute an oath of office, which is on your Declaration of Candidacy. We'll talk about that in a bit. And only legally allowed persons are permitted to administer the oath. So who are these individuals? Well, a notary public, a special district secretary, I'm sorry, not school district secretaries, but the secretary of a special district, an elections official, so that means us here in the office, for example, or others that are permitted by those election codes. And that is, for example, an elected person, like our district attorney or our assessor recorder may issue the oath of office. So this is the one issue that someone may have with doing their documents at home. They still have to find an authorized person by law that can issue the oath of office to you. Now, I mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it a couple of more times. We need to receive the original wet signature documents by 5 o'clock on Friday, August 7th. And of course, if the incumbent doesn't end up filing and it gets extended, then we need to receive those documents by August 12th, Wednesday, August 12th. So you may return those documents, of course, in person during office hours, so that means before 5 o'clock. Or you may return them by mail, as long as we receive those before 5 o'clock on Friday, August 7th. So what are the required documents? What are the absolute musts to get you as a filed candidate for the office? Well, the first one is the declaration of candidacy. And again, this starts on the 13th, next Monday, and ends on the 7th, but if it gets extended, ends on August 12th. So every candidate this coming election must file a declaration formally declaring that they are a candidate for that office. So this states your name, what office you're running for, what name you want to appear on the ballot, and what's your ballot designation, along with some pretty basic information like address and email and taking the oath of office. I mentioned this before, if the incumbent doesn't file, it gets extended. So this is something I might not have mentioned, that if the incumbent doesn't file and there is that extension period, anyone but the incumbent can file for that office. So if the incumbent misses the deadline, then they can't come in later and say, well, it was extended. They are not able to file past that time. Now, for Board of Education candidates, they're the only office that requires nomination signatures. This is a petition that they must obtain signatures from those who are able to vote for them. So of course, a registered voter who lives in their district, right? Lost that. So if they are able to vote for you in the election, they are able to sign the petition for you to be nominated for that office. And of course, that needs to be filed by August 7th. You don't need to file them all at the same time, but we require that you file at least 20, but no more than 40 at a time. So again, if you come in and you say, okay, I've only got 23 at this moment, you can turn those in and you can go out and keep collecting signatures. And then so if at least 20 of those signatures don't qualify, then you can turn in the other ones that you've attained while we were checking those. And again, look in the handbook. There is a nice section that talks about the ins and outs of circulating a petition. So things that you should do and things that you definitely should not do in order for your signatures to qualify. So what are some other documents to consider? The ballot designation is probably the number one that you should give some thought to before you come into file. And you can choose a ballot designation to appear under your name on the ballot. So what are some examples of this? So we see here, these are some actual persons that have run for office and their ballot designation under their name. But it's important to point out that no title or degree is allowed to appear on the same line on the ballot as a candidate's name. So for example, this would be doctor, honorary, or general. None of those titles can appear on the same line of the person. They have to appear underneath the name if it's a qualified ballot designation. So what are permitted ballot designations? Quick summary is you could put your elected office title, and this has to be from a vote of the people. If you choose to use the word incumbent instead, pardon me, if you are the incumbent and you were appointed to that office, you must also state appointed, right? So if you are the appointed assessor recorder, you must say appointed assessor recorder. You cannot just say assessor recorder. If you're a board member, you can put board member, but if you're appointed to that position, you have to put appointed board member. You could just use the word incumbent. That's okay. But the one catch with that is it's the only word you can use. You cannot add any other words to that. You could use your principal, and I emphasize principal, so the #1 profession, vocation, or occupation that you have. And normally we assess the principal as essentially the one that earns you the most money. What do you use to make your living? This, if you do choose to use your profession, vocation, or occupation, it's limited to 3 words. You may combine designations. So you could put that you are a firefighter / attorney, if that is your designation. But again, you need to put, it needs to be including your principal in there. But that would be limited to 3 words. All designations must be accurate and a factual representation of the candidate. So if you choose a ballot designation that can be misconstrued fairly easy, we may have to reject that ballot designation. So what are some examples of ballot designations that people use? Incumbent, farmer, appointed treasurer, tax collector. Notice that that appointed treasurer tax collector is multiple words, it's more than 3 words. That's because it's an elected title, so it does not have the 3-word limit. Board member, doctor / videographer. So notice with doctor / videographer, there's a slash in the middle to indicate that these are completely separate ballot designations. So what are some acceptable ballot designations? Let's go through just general idea of how we evaluate if it's acceptable. You may use the elective office you currently hold. So if you retired from an elective office 6 months ago, 3 years ago, you are not allowed to use it. You can only use the office you currently hold. You may only use the word incumbent by itself. I mentioned that. You can't add on other words. Except for your current elective office title, you are limited to 3 words. And a tricky thing is geographical names are counted as 1 word. You may include, of course, multiple designations, like I mentioned, but you must include your principal profession, occupation, vocation, or elected office in there. So you have to include at least one of those words must be your principal profession, occupation, vocation, or elected office. And it will be limited to 3 words. So with elected offices, again, you don't have the limit of 3 words, but the moment that you add on anything else, it then becomes limited by that 3 words. Here's another tricky one that people often get confused by. You may use the word retired if you use it with a title that you actually retired from. So let me give you an example. Often people will walk in here and say, I'm retired. That's what I am. And we have to tell them, well, no, you have to include what you retired from. I'm a retired doctor. I'm a retired public servant. I'm a retired military officer. Those are all okay. But you cannot use just the word retired. On that note, you can't use any other word that suggests prior employment. For example, if you used to be an author and that's how you made your living, you cannot say I'm a former author. You cannot use a prior one unless you are using the word retired and it's something that you actually retired from. If you use the word retired, one of the first questions we'll ask you is, do you receive a pension from that? Did you actually formally retire from it, or did you voluntarily leave or get fired, or how did you leave that employment? So what are some examples of actual ballot designations? County clerk, auditor, controller. Incumbent, like I mentioned, no other words can be used with incumbent, so incumbent / doctor would not be allowed. Farmer, lawyer, farmer / lawyer / musician, perfectly acceptable if those are all things that you actually do. And here I put in the example, businessman / treasurer tax collector. Treasurer tax collector is 3 words. It could even be multiple words if that's your title. But the moment that you add something else on there, it becomes limited by that 3 words. Retired police officer. Again, if you were a police officer and you retired from that position, you can use that. So let's go ahead and talk a moment about what are some of the unacceptable designations. You may not use an avocation, a hobby, volunteer work, etc. Well, I do a lot of work at the library. That is true. You may do a lot of work at the library, but it is a volunteer work, and that is by law not allowed. I listen to a lot of music. I'm a music. I enjoy listening to a lot of music. Yes, but it's not something that you do as employment, as a profession, occupation, or vocation. You may not use a pro forma position, honorary. I'm an honorary black belt. You may not use a status. Now, this is where people get caught up a lot. A status is something, again, that you are not earning. Is that your principal occupation, vocation? But for example, people look at veteran and say, well, isn't that indicating that I've retired from it? Not always, as we know, right? That is something that is your title regardless of how you left the military. So it is not permitted. Advocate, taxpayer, activist, all of those are not allowed under this law because they are considered statuses. You are not able to use a ballot designation that misleads voters. For example, if an attorney came in here and said, oh, I'm a district attorney because I only practice law within the district of the US Congress, number 4. That, of course, would be a very misleading statement if someone said they were a district attorney, and it would not be allowed. You may not use a commercial brand. I'm a Pepsi distributor. Nope, sorry. You can say that you are a distributor of some kind. That's fine, but you cannot use the commercial name in your ballot designation. You may not use an evaluation. I am an expert journalist. I'm famous. I am an honest taxpayer. All of those would not be allowed. And of course, you may not suggest anything illegal. And you may not use the name of a political party in your designation. And you may not use the name of a racial, religious, or ethnic group in your ballot designation. So what are some examples of unacceptable ballot designations? Avid gardener. I love gardening. Nope, sorry, can't use it. 1, it's a hobby, and 2, avid is an evaluation. Honorary firefighter. Honorary is not acceptable because you are not occupied as this. You were just granted that as an honor. Nike distributor, of course, that's a brand name. Concerned citizen. This is a status. It is not a designation. It is not an occupation, vocation, or profession. So how do you submit a ballot designation to us? Sorry, give me 1 second. Gary asks, I believe that I read that an appointed incumbent who has subsequently run for re-election and whose name didn't appear on the ballot because there were no additional candidates does not need to use the word appointed. Is that correct? Yes. So if you, so there's a difference between what's called appointed and appointed in lieu of election. So if in the last election you filed as a candidate, let's say, for example, you belong to a community service district and you filed as a candidate, and there was 3 seats up for election. Only 2 candidates filed for that seat, for those seats. So instead of that going to election, because there weren't enough candidates anyway, the Board of Supervisors would have appointed you in lieu of election. So what they're saying is, instead of the district incurring the cost of having an election, they were appointed as if they were elected to that position. So that means that in this coming election, if you're running to be reelected, you are the incumbent. You are not appointed in the same way. So let me give you another example. Let's say that there was a person in the seat at this community service district, and they moved to San Francisco, so they had to vacate their seat. And you were appointed to that seat midterm. That would be a true appointment when we're talking about ballot designations, and you would have to put you are the appointed incumbent. So there is a difference. Appointed in lieu of election is essentially you were elected to that position. You just didn't get your name on the ballot. Appointed person in this respect is someone who was appointed midterm because that seat became vacant. So how do you file a ballot designation? Well, the first thing you need to do is complete the ballot designation worksheet. Now, there's 2 things I've got to point out about this sheet. One is the way that it's written is you must fill out every single line of this worksheet. If it doesn't apply to you, for example, one section says your attorney's information, you may not have an attorney in this respect, you can put NA, not applicable, on every line. That's perfectly fine. You cannot leave it blank. If it is blank, we have to turn it back into you, and we will not accept it as filed. So you must fill out every line. The second thing I want to point out about this worksheet is the importance of it is that many times 2 people can request to have the same designation, but one person is allowed to use it and one person is not. Why? Because on the ballot designation worksheet, that's your opportunity to give supporting evidence for why you are allowed to use it legally, right? If one person says, I'm a musician, okay, I am paid regularly to write music for commercials, okay, and that is my primary source of income. Sounds about right. You're able to use that as a ballot designation. Another person writes down the word musician, and they say, well, I do it as a hobby. I've been doing it for 14 years. I play guitar in my bedroom every night. Then we would say, I'm sorry, you're not able to use that. So it is not as much of what ballot designation are you choosing, it's what is your supporting evidence for why you get to use that. This is why the ballot designation worksheet becomes so important. That is what we look at when we're deciding if this is a legally allowed designation. So once you file that with us, the elections department will review the evidence that you provided supporting the use of that designation. Either we'll accept it and file the worksheet, or we will inform you if it is not permitted. This would be, we will attempt to call you, but we will also be sending you a letter letting you know the reasons why it's not accepted. And at that point, you will have a 3 days to get back to us with a new ballot designation worksheet with a new designation. And we'll review that one again and give you our answer on that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. And you guys are welcome to use the question and answer section to give an answer, or even the chat section, if you want to tell me if this is an acceptable ballot designation and why. Jimi Hendrix, former singer. Anyone want to give it a try on the Q&A? Okay, let's go ahead and go forward. No, that would not be an acceptable ballot designation, because former is a word other than retired. So it's the only one that, pardon me, it's saying that you've done something prior, but it's not necessarily something you've retired from, so you wouldn't be able to use it. Lucille Ball, advertising executive for Vida Mita Vegemin Company. So why would you not be able to use that? Oops. So a couple of people have said no, but why? That's right, actually both are correct. It uses a brand name and it's more than 3 words. So you would not be able to use it. Tracy Flick, incumbent. Yes, she would be able to use it if she is the incumbent of the office that she's running for. So if she's running for school board, for her school board, and she's the incumbent of that school board, she can use it. Billy Botson, expert delivery boy. Yep, a couple of guys pointed out that expert is not allowed. Yeah, you can't put in an evaluation of there. Even if you're being humorous and you want to use a negative term, like, you know, horrible delivery boy, you still cannot do it. Zuri Chen, Los Angeles City Mayor. Yep, Zuri Chen, if Zuri is in fact the mayor of Los Angeles, she can use that. Now, it might throw you off because it's more than 3 words, but remember 2 things about this. It's an elected title name, so she can, she's not limited by those 3 words, but also Los Angeles would be counted as 1 word because it is a geographical name. Jerry Seinfeld, retired. So I wanted to point out there's a question about what if your occupation is expert witness, and that's true. There is actually a work title of expert witness, and that would be allowed if that is your actual job title. Those, I will tell you, are very tricky. There's been a couple of those, I can't think of an example right this moment, but where we immediately look and say, wait, that word is not allowed, and then figure out that that is actually part of their job title. So we would allow that. Jerry Seinfeld, it's a good example. There's a couple of things about this. Retired, nobody can use the word retired by itself. He has to be retired from something. You may be also saying, hey, didn't he just release a recent stand-up? He's not retired, and I think that's true also. Still making plenty of money. But no, he can't use the word retired by itself. It has to be something he is actually retired from. So there's a couple of reasons why he can't use it. Gerard Depardieu, French libertarian. Yeah, there's two things in here. He can't list an ethnic or racial group, and he can't list a political party. So both of these would disqualify this ballot designation. Hannibal Lecter, retired food critic. He did not eat food. That is true. Right. Yeah. If he only if he actually receives a pension for being a food critic, or for when he was a food critic, or if he was. So this one would be allowed if it were an accurate statement. Okay. Thank you guys for those answers. So another document that you'll be asked to consider is the Code of Fair Campaign Practices. This was created by the state legislature to give candidates guidelines for determining fair play. And it encourages candidates to discuss issues instead of untruth and distortions. So keeping it real. So that's a document, and it's actually, let me go back to that picture there. It's a very simple document, and if you look, there's those couple of lines at the bottom, and it asks you to print your name and sign and date and mark the office that you're running for if you agree to those guidelines. On page 44, it gives some more detail about filing a candidate statement. So what is a candidate statement? It provides information to the voters and written by you concerning your education and qualifications. So this is an optional document. If you file it with us and pay your fee, we will file it, and again, here at this office, we will file it in the Tuolumne County Voter Information Guide. If you are a state candidate, you can choose for that to be filed in the State Voter Information Guide. Something important to point out too, though, if you file it with us and your district includes other counties, it will not be published in those other counties unless you file and pay the fee to them as well. There is a word limit when it comes to this. If you are a U.S. Congress, State Senate, or State Assembly candidate, you are limited to 250 words. All other candidates, so that means special districts, school districts, Board of Education district are limited to 200 words. So looking here, this is an example of what a candidate statement may start off looking like. It lists the office, it lists the name of the candidate, it lists their occupation, and optionally, it could include the age of the candidate. How are the fees determined? I'll actually get to that in just a moment. But I want to point out too, when we count the words here in this office, we start counting from after education and qualifications. Things like the name of the office, your occupation, and even your age, that does not get included in the word count. How do you submit a candidate statement? We need you to provide a digital copy. So that means in a format like Microsoft Word, and it can be emailed to us or given a CD if you still will burn CDs. We will count the words in the document ourselves. So please don't send it to us and say, it's good to go, it's 200 words. We still have to count the words. And you pay the cost estimate. Now, how is the fee determined for the cost? Well, it is, we have to take into account printing the candidate statement in each and every booklet for every registered voter in your district. So you might imagine if you are running for a seat in Strawberry Fire District, that is fewer voters than if you are running for a seat in Tuolumne Utilities District. So the fees reflect that. After you pay the fee and we accept it as filed, you must sign the candidate statement affidavit stating that, yes, this is what you want us to file, and then this is what you want to be published in the candidate guide, in the voter information guide, sorry. We'd also ask you to file one of these candidate statement affidavits saying that you do not want one published if that's what you choose. And that is a little helpful to us so that when we're looking through our documents, we know that you said that you don't want one to be filed and we are not missing it. I mentioned before, what are the costs based on? The printing of the handbook, the handling of it, of course, because we have to pay a vendor to produce these books for us, and mailing them out to every registered voter in your district. You'll notice if you've run for office before we had a chart that said if one candidate filed, this would be the cost. If two candidates filed, this would be the cost of 3 of 4. And so the amount would be reduced based on how many candidates filed for that office. That's no longer the case. And the reason why is before we would print these very large booklets that could fit 4 candidate statements on one page. Now every voter will be receiving a booklet that's smaller and it fits inside your vote by mail envelope. And one candidate statement will be printed on each page. So regardless of how many candidate statements are filed, we will be, the cost of the candidate statement is the cost that we have for printing it in the booklet. I mentioned this earlier, but if you are running in a district that is in multiple counties, you will need to file a candidate statement in each county for it to be going to each voter. So what are some things to consider? Microsoft Word or other software will not count words the same way that we will. In your handbook, there is a chart that details different ways that we would count words. For example, if you are wanting to say 1 million and you write 1 with the 6 zeros, that would be counted as one word. If you write 1 million, writing out the 1 and the million, that would be 2 different words, right? If you hyphenate a word, Microsoft Word, for example, will count that as one word. But when we get it, we are required to look through the dictionary and make sure that that word is really a hyphenated word. And if it's not, we have to count it as multiple words. Yes, it gets detailed. So we ask that when you are counting your own words to make sure that you are under the limit, that you look at that chart in the handbook and make sure that you are on or below the word limit for your office. One thing that we often have happen is that candidates will say, gee, I don't know. Can you just count these for me? Please don't ask us to do that. During this time period, we become very busy, and it can become very, it takes quite a lot of time to count all the words in a candidate statement. And in fact, when we do it, we have 2 employees do it at the same time to make sure that we are counting them accurately. So it does take a lot of our time, so please do not send it to us and then say, oh, not quite right, I'll send it to you again. When you are ready to file it and you believe that you've gotten it down to the appropriate word count, then you can file it. Then you can file it and we will count the words. Another thing to consider is that statements may be withdrawn, but they cannot be changed. So once you file it with us, that is it. We accept it as filed, and that is the one that will be printed in the guide. You cannot say, hey, can you give that back? I need to make a change to it. Nope, I'm sorry. So you want to make sure that is, in fact, what you want to file. You can withdraw it, though. If you then decide, hey, I don't really want to file one, I've decided it's too expensive, for example, or it's not the way I want to go, you can withdraw it. All candidate statements remain confidential, meaning that we don't release it to the public until the deadline is reached. So on Friday at 5 o'clock, if we get a call from the paper, we can release the candidate statements to them, but not until then. One thing that's interesting to point out is that the candidate statements are subject to a court challenge for 10 days after the close of filing. So again, on 5 o'clock, on August 7th, if a candidate, an opposing candidate calls us up and says, hey, can you send me the candidate statement of my opponent? We can do that. And they, if they choose to, can file a court challenge requesting that that candidate statement be changed. They have to file that with the courts. We have nothing to do with it, but I just want to make you aware that that time period does exist. Again, in the handbook, there is some more details about format requirements, word counting requirements, and the cost. So there's a whole chart in there for what is the cost for your individual, not only district, but if you have individual trustees in your district, there is a separate cost for that as well. So often we get contacted from the media and also individuals wanting to talk to their local candidates. So they will call us for information. So we ask that you give us permission to post your contact information. So that can include your mailing address, your telephone number, or your email address. It can be one of those, it can be just 2 of them, it could be all 3. It's up to you. We will not post your Facebook account, for example, your website address. That goes into campaigning, and we're not able to do that. Just solely contact information. So let's go ahead and talk about financial and campaign filing. So what are the purpose of these forms? Well, a candidate is required to file financial and campaign disclosures to disclose what are their personal sources of income and who has contributed to their campaign and how have you spent that money. So this informs the public of your financial interest. As a candidate, or pardon me, as an elected person, you will be asked to make financial decisions. So all of us earn money in different ways. So when you disclose how you've earned your money or how you've received your campaign contributions, this is letting the public know where your financial interests are. So again, you are letting them know the identity of your contributors and how much they gave you. As I mentioned before, how much or what you spent that money on. It gives transparency and accountability to each candidate. So before we go too much farther, it's the responsibility of every candidate or their committee to be aware and file the required campaign disclosure statements in the correct and timely manner. The County Elections Office cannot provide advice or recommendations on the appropriate forms to file or what information to provide. Now, we take this very, very seriously. In a moment, I'm going to talk about the documents that I know for certain that you need to file, and I'll let you know. But as far as what information you put on there, that is your decision. And as far as remembering to file them by the deadline is also your responsibility. This is not regulated by us. This is regulated by the Fair Political Practices Commission, the FPPC. So it's them that you should go to for any questions or advice. So the one form, one form that you definitely need to file is called the Form 700. This discloses your personal financial interest. How do you earn your money? If you look there in that red box on the right, it shows the different sections that you may have to file. For example, if you receive money from rental property, if you receive money from investments, those are ones that you would need to disclose. For example, I need to even file a 700 because I make financial decisions for the department, so I need to file a 700 showing what are my financial interests. Every candidate, if you file, is required to file a 700. And this is due by the 88th day. This is August 7th, Friday, August 7th. The 501 form is called a candidate intention statement. Give me 1 second. The question is, do incumbents need to attach this document if they have already filed one for this year? Yes. If we're referring to the 700, if you look, let me go ahead and go back up to the 700. If you look up here in section 2, I take it back, section 3, it asks you, why are you filing it? The first box is your annual. It's saying, I am filing it for this year. But there is another box that says for you as a candidate running for this office, right? That is also when you need to file it. So yes, you will need to file one as a candidate. So the 501 is a candidate intention statement. This is simply stating that you intend to become a candidate for the coming election. Every candidate must file this form, even if you are running for re-election. It's a very simple form, basic information, but you do need to file it. There is the 410, the Statement of Organization. This is to report the organization of a recipient committee. So the first question people ask is, what's a recipient committee? Well, a recipient committee is an individual or group. So when you say the word committee, I know you think of a group of people, but it could be an individual who receives contributions of $200,000 or more per year for political purposes. If you have questions about if you qualify as a recipient committee, that again is a question you need to direct to FPPC. Something to point out though is even your personal funds of a candidate or as an office holder, if they are used in order to seek or hold elective office, those are considered contributions and they count toward qualifying as a recipient committee. So even if you say, I'm going to use $2,000 or more of my own money to run my campaign, then you are qualifying as a recipient committee. The 470 campaign statement. The 470 is what you would file if you do not anticipate receiving or spending $2,000 or more in the calendar year. So if you are a candidate running for office and you say, I don't think that I'm going to reach that threshold, you do need to file the 470 letting people know. This is if you are a candidate on the ballot. So if you file this coming period and there is not enough candidates for you to go on the ballot, this does not apply to you. This is for candidates that will be on the ballot, but will not be receiving or spending more than the $2,000 threshold. If later on you then say, whoops, I did end up receiving or spending more than $2,000, there is a supplemental form that you file saying that just that. Then there's the form 460. It's the recipient committee campaign statement. This is a form that you file reporting what you've received, how much, from who, and how you've spent it. It can be used to file pre-election campaign statements, semi-annual statements, quarterly statements, your termination, which is important because if you open a committee, you need to close it or else you need to keep filing, stating what's the actions going on in that committee. You can use it to file special odd year reports or amendments to ones that you've previously filed. So the question is, how do you know if your name will appear on the ballot? So by August 7th, if the office, or August 7th, or if it's extended August 12th, you will know how many candidates have filed for that office. So for example, if you are, if you belong to, if you're a candidate for Tuolumne Utilities District, and I believe there's 3 candidates up this coming year, if there are 4 candidates that file, then that means your name will be on the ballot. If only 3 people file, and there was 3 seats up for election, it will not be on the ballot. So if there are more candidates than are seats on, up for election, then you know it will be on the ballot. But if I file my paperwork before August 7th, I'm not quite understanding the question. So just to clarify too, everyone will need to file by the deadline, but actually some people, for example, let's say you need nomination signatures, you file those, but you don't have enough nomination signatures, you will not qualify as a candidate. So you may have filed your paperwork, but you did not qualify, so you will not be considered a qualified candidate, and you will not be considered in that count of how many candidates filed for that election. So on page 69 of your handbook, it has the schedule for local candidates. This is just a short rundown of what dates you need to pay attention to. The most overlooked date is this one, September 24th. That's called the pre-election, the first pre-election. So each candidate who will be listed on the ballot must file either a 460 or a 470 We try to send out an email to everyone we have information for, but keep this in mind, it is your responsibility to pay attention to this date. If you are a candidate that will be on the ballot, you must file one of those two documents. A 470 says that you do not believe you're going to be earning or receiving or spending more than that $2,000, and a 460 is reporting those specifics if you have. Give me one moment, there's a few questions. Okay, so one of the questions is, just to be clear, if a candidate filed their 700 as part of their initial filing in the primary election in March, will they have to file a new one by August 7th? I believe in that circumstance, because you've already, this filing does not, is not the same as the other candidates, like for school district and special district, because you're not actually filing to qualify. So my first thought is that the Form 700 doesn't apply, but I will need to research that. And another one asked me to repeat, how will we know if there are enough to go to vote? How will you know that there's enough candidates to go on the ballot? Every night we will be posting a report that tells you who has filed for the office. So, and on the report, it will say, so for example, for TUD, it'll say there are 3 seats available, and you'll see below it how many candidates have filed and how many candidates have qualified for that office. So if there's 3 seats up for election and there are 3 candidates that have filed, you know now that it will not go to election. However, on August 7th at 5 o'clock, once we release that report, if there are 4 candidates, then it is going to go on the ballot because, again, if there are only 3 seats and 3 candidates file, the Board of Supervisors will say, this should not go to election because we already know who will be winning the election. So we will appoint them in lieu of election. We will appoint them instead of it going to election. But if there are 4 candidates, it must go to a vote of the people. So now, what I'm stating about this, on this September 24th date, you will have about a month and a half after we post that report to know if you'll be filing a 460 or a 470, or if you're going to be on the ballot. So the question, there's a question of, can we get a copy of the presentation by email? Yes, actually, this presentation right now is being recorded. I'm going to see if I can send you guys a link to the presentation, but I believe I can also change the PowerPoint to a PDF and send that to you as well. And again, I point out that September 24th date because if you are a candidate on the ballot and you fail to file those forms by the deadline, you will have a late fee of $10 a day until you file that document. So if you file it on September 25th, September 26th, it will be accruing that late fee of $10 a day before you file it. Also in the handbook, I included some important facts about filing, some requirements when filing that are often overlooked, and some best practices for you to consider. As I mentioned, the FPPC is the one you want to ask for advice or recommendations. Their information is there. It's also in the handbook. I have heard that emailing them is the best way to get a response. I am guessing because of COVID that response time has been extended, so please be patient. Going to leave that up there for just a moment longer so you can write some stuff down. Okay. So some helpful information for you, just so you're aware. One of them is write-in candidacy. On September 7th, the filing period to become a write-in candidate begins. Many people don't realize, but to be a write-in candidate, an actual write-in candidate, you must file with our office and become qualified to run as a write-in candidate. There's no filing fee. For most of the offices this election, there is no filing fee. But if there were, a write-in candidate would not have to pay it. Only candidates who are filed and qualify are counted if a voter writes in their name. So we have had this before where candidates have stated to the newspaper that they are a write-in candidate, and they tell people, don't forget to write in my name, but they have never filed with us, which means that even if someone wrote in their name, it would not be counted towards them. Now, this is for good reason, of course. You may think, yeah, for example, let's say someone is running for sheriff, and there's very specific requirements to qualify as a candidate for sheriff. So if you just tell everyone, write in my name, and everyone writes in your name, you might have now elected an unqualified person as sheriff. So they must first come in here and file, just like all of you will need to, and qualify as a candidate. Requesting voter information. So voter and election related information can be requested from our office. It can only be requested by individuals using the material for legally allowed reasons. So what are these legally allowed reasons? So if they are part of an election, if you are a candidate or you're part of a candidate's campaign, or you are promoting a measure, for example, or a proposition. If you are part of the government requesting the voter information, you are a journalist. We often have the Union Democrat request information, or you're doing it for educational purposes. We have a lot of educational institutions request information from us. When ordering your voter registration information, you have to complete the application and use agreement and provide a copy of your driver's license. So what does this application do? Well, first of all, the application, of course, tells us what information you are requesting. Are you requesting voter information, their political preferences, their voting history, or are you requesting the vote by mail information? Did someone already return their vote by mail for this election? That sometimes helps candidates know who they're going to be targeting for campaigning. The most commonly requested information is one, it's called the multi-purpose voter list. This is just basic voter information like their names, their address, phone numbers, and their voting history. There's the street index or walking list. This is organized by the street that a voter lives on. This is often used by candidates that are just going to go on the street and walk up to the houses with registered voters. We often have requests for vote by mail list. This again tells you who has been issued a vote by mail ballot and if they've returned it already. Just a note too, if you are a candidate for a district, say for example, you're a candidate for the Somerville Elementary School District, when you request voter information, you can only request information for the Somerville Elementary School District. You can't request it for the entire county. We're going to go ahead and finish up with talking about the Voters' Choice Act. Again, we implemented this in March of this year, and we're going to be using this model again this coming election. So what is the Voters' Choice Act? Well, the Voters' Choice Act was Senate Bill 450, which was passed in 2016, and it was designed to modernize voting and increase flexibility and convenience for the voters. So one thing this does is in prior elections, for example, polling locations were only open on election day from 7 in the morning to 8 at night. Now, vote centers will be open for 4 days before the election. Now, this is one major change from March. In March, we were actually open for 11 days total, but because of COVID-19, the state has allowed us to be open only 4 days because we believe that we were going to have difficulty finding enough workers to cover the entire 11 days. Plus, a bigger reason is in the first 9 days of the election in March, we received 100 voters in all of our vote centers. The other 900 voters were received in the last 2 days. So the being open for 11 days wasn't really cost effective among a lot of other reasons. In the prior model also, a voter needed to go to the polling location that they were assigned. So for example, if you lived in Twainhart and you went to the polling location in Jamestown, they would say, I'm sorry, I don't have your name on the ballot, or on the roster. And they would give you what's called a provisional ballot where you'd have to fill out an envelope and put your ballot inside of it. And only later on would our office check that envelope and make sure that you're a registered voter and count only the contest on that ballot that you were allowed to vote for. In the coming, with the vote center model, you can go to any vote center you want in the county. We will have an electronic roster where they will be able to look up all the registered voters in Tuolumne County, and once they find you, you sign, and they can print out the ballot for the area that you belong to. Got a question? Nancy Mora, who was working at a vote center in Groveland, she mentioned that she had several comments from voters that they didn't know that the vote centers were open. Yeah, for example, in Groveland, they were only open for 4 days and people didn't realize that they were open. We realized that a lot of people didn't know. I will say we did quite a lot of outreach to advertise the vote center model, and we'll be doing that again this coming election. What was hard is when a lot of people told us they didn't know, we told them all the different places that we advertised it, and not everyone hears the message. So we will be making a great effort to make sure that the word gets out, including putting in our voter information guides and on the radio and the newspaper, and we are likely going to put advertisements on buses, and we're going to be doing quite a lot of different things to get the word out. But one of the greatest asset to us is you guys. As a candidate for the coming election, now that you're aware of this different vote center model, if you spread the word, that's one of the best ways of getting the word out. In our prior election model, like I mentioned before, you received a ballot for that area. So if you did if you're from Twainhart and you went to the polling location in Jamestown and Twainhart Elementary was on the ballot, you would receive a ballot that didn't have that on there. So with the vote center model now, we print out the ballot based on the voter that comes in. So you will get the ballot for your area. So the locations of our vote centers are actually going to be the same that we had in March of 2020. It's going to be our office, Twain Harte Bible Church, Tuolumne Memorial Hall, Wilson Realty, and Groveland Library. So in prior elections, the two groups that automatically received a vote by mail ballot were those who requested to vote by mail permanently and those who lived in areas that didn't have polling locations. Now, under the VCA, every registered voter is mailed a ballot 29 days before the election. They can then choose if they want to vote that ballot or go to a vote center instead. One of the first questions that people ask us is they say, well, what if they vote both? Our systems are reported to where once you vote a ballot and you're recorded as voting, you are not able to vote with another method. So, for example, if we receive a vote by mail ballot and you have already voted in a vote center, our system will say, sorry, this person has already voted, do not accept this ballot. So one person, one vote. So I have a question of why was the Mountain Lake location deleted? Why wasn't it used? Pine Mountain Lake, we actually didn't use it in 2018 as well, I believe. I'm trying to remember right offhand. They had issues with us using that location for as long as we did. So we decided that that was not where we're going to use. Also, when we chose the locations of our vote centers, we wanted to choose the location that was going to be accessible by the most people. So one thing that we looked at is in prior elections with the polling locations, what were the locations that were most visited? And what were the locations that were accessible by the most people in that area? Pine Mountain Lake, unfortunately, is an area that is limited sometimes by those. It's not available to those who live outside of that community. So we chose to put it at Groveland Library. So yes, so it's being mentioned that actually now that I recall, I believe what happened in 2018 in the June election when we had the primary in June, we did use Pine Mountain Lake, but in November of 2018, we weren't permitted to use Pine Mountain Lake. So the polling location that was at Pine Mountain Lake was combined with Groveland Library. So they had two that year. Yeah, actually, if we want to get into, because Pine Mountain Lake is kind of a specific area, Janice, you're welcome to go ahead and give me a call, and I can talk in more detail about the decision that went into Groveland Library and Pine Mountain Lake. But let me go ahead and use this time here to talk about the Voters' Choice Act for everyone that's on the line. So another thing under the another thing with dropping off a vote by mail ballot, you have the choice of dropping off by mail, at the office, or at a polling location only on election day. So the Voters' Choice Act adds that you can return it at a vote center, which of course is open multiple days. And by the way, when I say 4 days, that includes Saturday and Sunday. So fewer people have the restriction of work limiting them from going to vote. And we have ballot drop-off locations. What's a ballot drop-off location? Well, we've put in boxes across the county On the left, you see there where it says outside. Those are boxes that we've installed in locations. They're permanently cemented in there, and they are unlocked 29 days before the election. And we have one outside our office, which is rolled in and out during office hours. So the locations that we already have them installed is the Miwok Library, Columbia Elementary School, the Junction, under the clock, Sonora Library, across the road, or right across the path from the book drop-off. And again, our elections office has the one that we roll in and out. Some great news is we are working to add more locations for this election. We recently purchased more boxes, and we are working on different places that we can place them. If you have any ideas of where would be a good place to place a box for people to drop off their ballots, feel free to email me and let me know, or give me a call. I will tell you there's quite a list of criteria in the law that we have to consider when putting a box, and one of the biggest ones on there is it has to be accessible to those with disabilities. It has to be ADA accessible. So it has to be a place that someone can park, get out of their car, and relatively flat roll up to the box and or walk up to the box without any difficulty and insert their ballot. So when you recommend places, just keep that in mind, that that's one thing that we have to consider. Well, great. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm just wondering, is there any one that might have questions that they'd like to ask before we finish up? You guys are more than welcome. I very much enjoy giving these classes because it gives me an opportunity to talk to you guys and answer any questions that you have. You know what, I forgot to mention too. So Jason works for the CAO's office, and he has a Zoom account for the county. So when I sent it out, it comes out showing Jason as the administrator, when really Jason was on paternity leave, and he didn't even know that I had sent that out. So he came back, I think, just today or yesterday. So he sent me saying, "Oh my gosh, why do I have these emails?" So, but I will tell him thank you for you. Awesome. So we have a question that, can you know if voters voted in the primary? You sure can. So that goes back to that voter information. You just need to fill out the application, and I can send you a list of those in your district, and it will say voting history. So let me go ahead and actually point out the difference between the vote by mail list and the multi-purpose list. The multi-purpose list will give you a voting history for the voter for past elections. And the March election is now considered a past election. So it will have the March election on there. If we are still in the middle of that election, say for example, it's 15 days before the election, and you want to know who has returned a vote by mail ballot and who has not, that you would have to request a vote by mail list, because that has not been applied to their voting history yet. It's still an active election, and the voting history doesn't get applied until probably about a month after election day. So if you're wanting to know who voted in the primary, you are more than welcome to that information. Just have to fill out the information and pay the fee, and I can send that off to you. I'm sorry, let me go ahead and clarify. Voting history is applied about 30 days after an election. So if you request a vote by mail, if you request a multi-purpose list, it will have the voting history of all past elections. The vote by mail list will only tell you if someone has been sent a vote by mail or received a vote by mail for the current election. So again, if the election's November 3rd, so if on October 20th, you request a vote by mail list, it will say who was sent a vote by mail ballot and who we received it from, and on what day for the November election. But if you request a vote by mail, a multi-purpose list on that date, it will not show anything about the November election because that has not been applied to someone's voting history yet. And one of the best things too, when it comes to voter information, feel free to give us a call and say, hey, this is the information that I'm hoping to get. And I can direct you to what report would give you that information. Okay, I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. It was very much appreciated. And again, if you have any other questions, you are welcome to email me or give me a call, or email or call Kim or Debbie as well. So thank you guys very much, and I look forward to seeing you guys filing. Bye-bye.